This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our friends at Track Farms and their excellent CBD. Seriously, if you have not yet, it's time to get on the CBD train. Go to track-farms.com, enter the code STRANGERS at checkout. That's going to get you 15% off your order and get you some CBD. Matthew Mossbrucker, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm pretty excited today. So we are in Morrison, Colorado. That is the town we're in.
That is correct. Yeah, the home of the Jurassic.
The home of the Jurassic, at the Morrison Natural History Museum, in fact. And you've brought us to the cool room. For those who are just listening, we are in the fossil preparation room.
Yeah,
of some
this is
type.
our paleontology preparation lab.
And what are we working on here?
Well, in this space, we have a lot going on. So we have multiple projects, including tearing apart old Jurassic boulders from a dig site called Quarry 5. Quarry 5 yielded the very first Stegosaurus fossils ever found anywhere in the world. And we're looking for more of them. And we're looking to reconstruct the ecosystem that Stegosaurus was a part of. It takes a long time because a rock it is so hard. It breaks my heart. But it's doable. It's the removal of the rock with specialized tools. We have a ground sloth that we're putting together in the room, and my favorite little pet project that I'm just getting back to post-pandemic is cleaning hard stone away from a one-of-a-kind dinosaur head.
Wow, which type of dinosaur?
Oh, this is a fun one. So if you were here in Morrison about 146 million years ago, the largest dinosaur that you would see would have a very long neck, a very long tail. The hips would go up to a second-story window. In fact, if the dinosaur was standing in our parking lot, you couldn't see past its hips if you were looking out this window.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big guy. This is called Apatosaurus Ajax. It was among the first giant Jurassic dinosaurs ever found, anywhere in the world, from right here in Morrison, Colorado. When the first one was collected, most of a skeleton, they did find the back of its head, the brain case, and bones that anchor the lower jaw to the skull called quadrates. What was missing was the snout of that dinosaur, so its face. And what I have in the rock in front of me is the snout, the lost snout of Apatosaurus Ajax. And this specimen, we've let it rest for a couple of years, now post-pandemic and a little bit of restructuring here at the museum. I'm able to get back to it and continue its preparation. And so it just so happens we've recently found more pieces of this skull that will enable us to reconstruct the lost face of Apatosaurus. And near as I can tell, it's going to be different than its closest cousins.
That's super cool. This is it's an exciting episode for me because I haven't been able to do a ton of paleontology, but I have had one other paleontologist on the podcast, which was Alina Iskandarova. From an early episode, people might remember we were in Seattle talking about fossils. And we've got very different fossils here out in Colorado. I mean, the story is infinitely different down here, but it's all part of that North American thing. The fun thing for you today is that my extent of knowledge when it comes to paleontology is almost zero. I mean, unlike, I guess, most people, I have read the book Jurassic Park, but, that's a little past the movie. But but the thing is, like, as a kid, I love dinosaurs, man. It was the coolest. Do kids today still get into dinosaurs? Is it still happening? I feel like kids are so different now, but I gotta hope they still love dinosaurs.
Oh no, they're no different when it comes to curiosity.
Perfect.
And then not just kids, adults too. That curiosity never dies. And I have the privilege of talking with thousands of people that come through this little museum every year, all walks of life, all ages, and the one common tie that binds them together is their curiosity. They have great questions, and a lot of them have a passion for this subject.
Yeah.
This is not just for kids. The Jurassic Park generation has grown up, and they're as dino hungry as they ever were.
I actually found someone. So Alina was the one who referred me to you. And as I was looking at the museum's page, I saw someone who is really, really into Jurassic Park and is a big collector of Jurassic Park things on Instagram. And I'm sure there's a lot of them, so I don't need to name any names here. But I was I didn't realize there was a whole genre of people that existed. I have seen, the Jeeps that are all completely tricked out.
All right.
Which is pretty cool.
Oh yeah.
But I didn't realize how deep this went. But I guess it's deeply tied in culturally to our love of dinosaurs. It's amazing how that all kind of connected and came together. Just one science fiction book, and we've got a whole generation obsessed with dinosaurs again.
And you know what's funny is that the obsession with dinosaurs does go back before Jurassic Park.
For sure.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of people that grew up loving dinosaurs just based on very simple toys, very simple books, going to museums, and they fell in love with these animals that look like monsters out of a sci-fi book, but they're real, and that reality, that connection with something that looks so fantastic, but in fact walked this earth, that's just tickled the human imagination for generations upon generations.
It feels like a big joke. It feels like someone's playing a joke on us when we dig
I
in
know,
the
right?
ground and find these things, and we're like, "What are you talking about? This existed at some point."
Oh, I know.
But I don't have to tell you that because that is what you do. When did you start getting into this field?
You know, I was one of those tiny, obnoxious kids back in the 80s that had a Dorothy Hamill haircut. And if the kids listening to this don't know what that is, just go ahead and Google it. That was me. And I just loved dinosaurs. I loved everything about them, couldn't get enough. There weren't many, documentaries on TV, but there were a few, and every once in a while. But every book I could get my hands on at the library, at school, or the public library, just opened my brain to a connection with life going through time and all sorts of ideas about how life came to be and how it's changed and adapted to a violent and changing earth. And it's always fascinated me. Even from the time I was a little kid, I wanted to understand what life was like for these dinosaurs, what the world was like for them. And unfortunately, my books gave me very few answers because they're kids' books. And in kids' books, especially back in the day, tended to recycle the same set of facts, like an animal called Trachodon that turns out to be a dinosaur called Edmontosaurus, had 2,000 teeth. Well, it didn't. Or that Stegosaurus had 2 brains, one in its head, one in its butt. It didn't. All sorts of these wonderful ideas. Learning about dinosaurs for me taught me some critical thinking skills. And those critical thinking skills are great when you're an adult and you have to vote or make a purchase or just make, tough decisions that don't seem like they have to do with dinosaurs. But I think if we want to teach critical thinking in our society, using dinosaurs with kids is a great gateway for that.
Yeah, I believe that. And I think I can hear that made that difference to you. I feel like everybody has that thing that taught them how to critically think,
Oh,
or
yeah.
hopefully, but sometimes I think we don't see that quite as much anymore. But you never know what subject's going to bring it out. But science is such a great one. My favorite metaphor on science is the idea that, I think this is a Robert Pirsig thing, but I might be totally misoriginating this one. But the idea that religion writes with a pen and science writes with a pencil, and the idea is that you can always go back and change that. I think that was Pirsig, but I could be completely wrong.
Honestly, I don't know. I love it.
Yeah.
And it's true. I mean, and
That's critical thinking.
well, and I think, I don't want to disparage religion. I'm not a religious person myself, but I know a lot of people find value and hope and comfort in those traditions. For me, looking at the world for what it is and its gray areas, of which there are, most areas
Yeah.
turn out to be gray areas.
Yeah.
And trying to use the information that I have to make the best decisions possible. It has guided my life moving forward. It's tough, though, because science doesn't give us firm answers.
No.
And especially with a historical science like paleontology, those ideas that we have about these animals not only can change, but absolutely will change with time as we uncover more fossils and we discuss different ideas. And there will never be consensus in the field of paleontology when it comes to just about anything.
Right.
If you get 2 paleontologists in a room with one fossil and you ask them for a simple interpretation, you're going to end up with a handful of interpretations that are possible. With some more likely than others,
Yeah.
but that is the nature of this particular business, I suppose.
That's the best thing about humans, though. I mean,
Yeah.
is that we can cordially disagree. Hopefully it's cordially. And sometimes it's not, and I think that's a fault of an individual that you should be able to put your views against someone else's views and try to work them out because you're both trying to the same goal.
Right.
Quick thing for you: your headphones I think might be on backwards. They'd be a lot more comfy if you swap them. Right. Yes, I think that they'll fit to your ears quite a bit better.
Oh yeah.
Does that help out?
Oh, Lord.
There's actually a switch on the side. It might be. Here, you're gonna like this. All right, so there's a switch on your right ear. Just push it forward toward your face. Do you feel the button right in the middle? Listeners, this is so fun. Oh, that's the wrong button. Hang on. See that switch? Just do that.
Oh. Ooh.
You're gonna like that. How does that sound now? It's like the world doesn't exist.
Oh yeah, that's much better.
Ooh,
hello.
Bose Quiet Comfort 35 something. I would love for that to be a sponsor of the show, man. That'd be great.
Oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah.
I hear only our voice. It's like we're in a vacuum speaking together.
I'm addicted to these headphones. I really wear them because they're Bluetooth and they hook up to my phone, and I'm just like, throw a podcast on, we're done.
Jeez.
The world can't mess with me.
These are nice.
All right, thank you, Bose, for your promotional consideration.
And I also am now a convert to the Bose noise canceling technology.
Damn it! Why aren't you paying me, Bose? We're gonna make thousands of sales on this one. I was supposed. Oh no, I guess I'm not watching my language because we're doing Dinosaurs After Dark today.
Oh yeah, because who's your sponsor right now?
Track Farm CBD.
Track Farm CBD. I don't believe that most children are consumers of such a product.
Not
so
typically.
I think that at the top of the episode we should probably mention that this particular podcast may contain language not suitable for young children.
You're so ready to be a podcast guest or a podcast host already.
I'm a humble guest. I'm just a man that digs up old dead things and shows them to children.
I've heard your catchphrase and I like it a lot. It plays on that sick sort of like who would do this, but also it's one of my favorite things as a kid. If I had had a museum like this as a kid, I would have been stoked. This is so cool. But I grew up in Illinois, and I don't think there was a whole lot of dinosaur activity.
No dinos. You do have other fossils that are cool. But before I lose this thread,
go for it.
My idea definitely with this museum was to create the kind of museum that kids like me would have wanted to visit. Things that are hands-on, relevant to the area to make that connection with local history, and staffed with people that know what they're talking about, so I can ask those hard questions and get answers if they exist.
Tell me your podcast idea. You were going to do a sex hotline for dinosaurs?
Oh yeah. Well, when we're out digging in the field, especially late in the day, our brains get a little addled in the heat. So I like to come up with various ideas. It's my brainstorming time. And one of the ideas was a sex help podcast for dinosaurs, because I want them to help me understand how they mated. So, specifically animals like Stegosaurus, because I have some ideas, but it's all very confusing to me.
Right.
And it flopped because they're all dead, and I can't get any of those direct questions answered. But
yeah, the phone calls would be interesting for sure. You'd have to have a time phone of some sort. I don't know. Then you'd have to teach English. It would be complicated.
Yeah. I don't speak Stegosaurus, so I mean it's going to be a challenge. But.
No, I don't even think you have an interpreter out there. I mean, we could put it on Upwork and see if we can find somebody, but that's tough.
I know there are so many hills to climb in this life.
Yeah, literally and figuratively. The town of Morrison, which is sort of wedged right next to Red Rocks area near Denver. It was a great drive out here. We're staying up in kind of Idaho Springs area.
Oh, it's nice there.
Beautiful. Yeah. Oh, it's been a best week. And I'm driving down here and I'm just thinking, because I'm in the podcast today and I'm thinking about imagining dinosaurs walking around here. But I need you to help me understand the timeline because I'm kind of an idiot. So the timeline of things, I'm like, okay, is a T-Rex hiking up these mountains? Wait, when did these mountains happen versus when did the Stegosaur happen? Okay. How does it all fit together? Because I don't understand how Colorado looked at that point.
Well, I appreciate that question. And as a fellow idiot, I'm going to help to shed a little bit of light. The basic ideas on how we know what Colorado looked like back during the time of dinosaurs and how we know that these two dinosaurs, Stegosaurus and T-Rex, that they didn't live at the same time are common sense based observations that anybody can make. You don't need specialized training for this. So here at the Morrison Museum, we are nestled within a wonderful little valley, this wonderful little cradle. To the west, we have deeply ancient rocks where the most complicated life forms were free-floating blobs of blue-green algae and personal injury and divorce attorneys. To the east, we have what's called the Dakota Hogback. This is a ridge of sedimentary rock that is the accumulation of sand and mud and sometimes gravel that has been cemented together naturally. This particular ridge contains multiple habitats through time for at least 3 different dinosaur, where should I use periods? Not geologic periods, but maybe episodes of Earth history. And at the top of that ridge, facing the city of Denver, you have wonderful footprints. Footprints everybody knows about, right? You can almost see them from the highway there along Dinosaur Ridge, which is a brilliant hike, great tour. Everybody should get over there. Those tracks are made by some of the earliest dinosaurs we call duckbills. These are herbivorous dinosaurs that rose to dominance in the mid-Cretaceous period with the flooding of the western interior Cretaceous seaway into Colorado and the American West. And they really they just dominated these dinosaurs until the end of the age of dinosaurs. Everybody knows duckbills. But at the bottom of the same ridge, the west-facing portion, we have flat layers of rocks that are full of dinosaurs that are very different. Dinosaurs like the spike-tailed Stegosaurus, the long-necked Apatosaurus, the carnivorous Allosaurus. It looks a bit like a T-Rex, just smaller, a bit skinnier.
And are those the ones that are marine or no?
No, these are all land-loving true dinosaurs. A lot of the marine animals, even though many dinosaurs could swim, we do have some swimming tracks from carnivorous dinosaurs. The things living in the ocean, pretty different. They come from different lineages and are not considered to be true dinosaurs.
Okay.
Life is far more diverse than I think what many of us learned in kids' books growing up. But my point in all of this is that the only place to find a dinosaur like Stegosaurus is in that narrow band of rock there at the base of that ridge. It's the only place. In fact, the characteristics of those rocks are unique, and we can map them regionally, not just through Morrison, but throughout the state of Colorado in various places, even out in the western slope, up into Wyoming, over into Utah. 8 different states, we have this blanket of rock that contains this unique set of dinosaurs like Stegosaurus, Apatosaurus, and Allosaurus.
I know what Allosaurus is now. I'm thinking of it now.
That's cool.
It does look like a T-Rex.
It does look like a
I think
T-Rex.
I was thinking of a plesiosaur.
It's okay.
Does that sound right?
It does.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a different story, though.
Cool. Okay.
Now, in that Morrison Formation, named after our little town, you're never going to find a T-Rex. They didn't exist yet. No one's ever found bones from a T-Rex in the Morrison Formation. But there's another unit that we can map that is stacked physically on top of the Morrison Formation. And down here in Denver, we call it the Denver Formation. If you go up north into Wyoming, where I dig, also you have the Lance Formation. Go up a little bit north from there into the Dakotas and Montana. You've got the Hell Creek Formation. That's where you find T-Rex, Triceratops. You never find these two animals in the same layers of rock. That's how you know they didn't live at the same time.
Right.
It's a very simple observation.
Right. Makes sense.
Very simple. And when it comes to the landscape, the rocks themselves, because of their nature, they were once sand and mud being moved around by wind and water.
Mm-hmm.
They will give us clues to climate and landscape, which is really fascinating. We can look for isotopes and do all sorts of chemical analyses. We can match the constituency, kind of the fabric of the rock, with modern day depositional environments, say it be a river or a pond, and match them up and really reconstruct a landscape through time. But the fascinating thing you mentioned about the mountains, right?
Yeah.
All right. So we're T-Rex is climbing up mountains here, Stegosaurus too, but just at different times because we're finding them in different rock layers. We can confidently say no to that. And here's why I'm confident in that. All of our rocks here in this little valley in Morrison leading up to that Dakota hogback, they're tilted. These were originally flat rocks, but they're tilted on the side. I've heard for years people ask the question, why are these dinosaurs climbing up these hills, making these tracks on Dinosaur Ridge? Well, they weren't, as it turns out. When those tracks were being made, Morrison and Denver were not a mile high above sea level. Okay, we were, in fact, we actually were at or right below sea level. The mountains that we know and love today were still buried deep within the earth. Colorado was fairly flat and featureless. Skiing was terrible at that time.
Except for the cross-country skiing. That was probably water skiing, maybe.
Do we recognize cross-country in Colorado?
Not in Colorado.
I don't.
No.
Yeah,
I
we're
guess
all
you guys
about the
don't.
downhill.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
My bad.
It's fine. You're forgiven. It's a common mistake that many transplants make. But the rise of the Rockies themselves, as we know them today, is recorded within the rocks from the times of T-Rex. We can see chunks of the fabric that makes up those mountains, those types of specialized rocks, within the sediment that you find T-Rex and Triceratops bones in. Lots of clues in the Denver Formation of the rise of the Rockies, the beginning of the rise of the Rockies. So T-Rex knew the birth of the Rockies. Stegosaurus, not so much.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
So that's got to make your job more complicated then, because I'm familiar with the Rockies as being a newer mountain range, which would be why it's rocky. That's always what I have heard, and the reason you can tell mountains are older because they're more curved over and they're less rocky. They get eroded with time. That's as far as I
No, it's
understand.
true. I mean, but that's true.
That has to make your job more complicated when you have layers of rock and sediment, and then they're all pushed up from tectonic shifts, right? And that changes how those layers even function, right?
If that wouldn't have happened, the Rockies wouldn't have pushed up here, we wouldn't have found the Stegosaurus and Apatosaurus fossils here in Morrison. None of these fossils would have been exposed at the surface. And while they've only highlighted the late Jurassic and the late Cretaceous, 80 million years of time between these two, there's a lot more in the rock record here. And having it exposed at the surface, thanks to the birth of the Rockies, gives us insight into just how much Colorado has changed through time. Most pointedly, these are not the first Rocky Mountains to have existed here in Colorado. But how do we know? You have to ask that question. How do we know?
How do we know?
Okay, there you go. Okay, so how do we know? So you're familiar with Red Rocks Amphitheater, right?
Yes.
You got a concert there yet?
No, I haven't had the chance, but I've been there, and it's super cool.
It is beautiful. Or Roxborough State Park, Garden of the Gods down in Colorado Springs. It's all the same formation of rock. So it's the same basic unit deposited at the same time in similar rock type.
Okay.
When we study these rocks closely, we can see that they are made up of fragments of mountains that haven't tumbled very far from their original source. And they give us the clue that these formations, which are now maroon in color, they were the tailings of the first set of Rocky Mountains that were here long before the dinosaurs. We know that this happened before the dinosaurs were here because we only find that red rocks layer, the Fountain Formation, stacked below the dinosaur bone-bearing layers.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's actually not very hard to do this job. Don't tell anyone. But just a lot of very basic common sense observations that literally anyone can make.
Good logic, good critical thinking, like you said, thinking about how does this all fit together and how can we write with that pencil. So there's got to be a complicated history in this state then, because even as you're driving through the canyons and through the tunnels and you realize this was such a mining area that they must have been heavily blasted away, a lot of the rock that probably would have been useful to you guys? Like, how does paleontology work within this modern developmental world where everybody wants to dig in and blast away and make what they want to make and put their McDonald's on the hill there? And
Yeah, it's tough because Colorado doesn't have strong laws protecting fossils and I should say forcing, but requiring, which is more gentle but means the same thing. Weasel word there. Requiring contractors and developers to work with accredited paleontologists and organizations to do site surveys before they begin excavating. With certain public projects, that does happen. Private projects, not so much. There is a general fear that if fossils are found at a construction area, that a museum, the government, black helicopters and all, will swoop down, stop construction, and take everything, ruin your project, ruin your timeline. Everyone's going to be out of jobs. I've heard this from backhoe operators and construction folks for years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just not the case. Certainly not here in Colorado. If you contact a museum because you think you found a fossil, we will bend over backwards to keep you on schedule, collect the fossils, protect the history, and make those recommendations. And if you own the land in Colorado, you own the fossils too. And if those were to be donated to a museum and independently appraised, you could have a tax write-off for your business. And obviously, a lot of good PR can come from that too. Not to mention that you're saving some rare evidence of ancient life in Colorado.
That is super cool. Yeah. Well, it's sad that construction would be almost incentivized to avoid bringing up when they found something. I think I'm familiar with some other archaeological things that are similar, where we want to hide that we found something at our own development in order to get the project done. It's complicated, isn't it? I mean, it's a complicated world.
Yeah.
You understand. As a business owner, I understand where that person's coming from. It's like, oh my God,
do too.
like I just want to do the project.
Oh, I know.
But then you're like, what is your responsibility in the history of humanity? What's your responsibility to uncover what we know about the world and help natural sciences? And
right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when it comes to archaeology, there are strong laws, federal laws, that will protect human graves. And there we do have, I think, an ethical responsibility to make sure that human remains that are found are not from a recent murder victim. And that's why the coroner is called first, to make sure that you're not dealing with a crime scene that had gone undiscovered. So that is important, and then when you do find the remains of people that were intentionally buried, rightfully buried, not necessarily a part of our modern society, indigenous folks or others, I think we also have an ethical responsibility to make sure that those remains are treated with dignity and care, because our society hasn't done that for an awfully long time. We got to do better. And I think it's important that people that are in that line of work take that to heart. And honestly, I think a lot of them do and would do the right thing in that situation. I really do. Yeah. When it comes to fossils, though, it's a different ballgame. It truly is. The dig for an archaeological salvage archaeology dig, that's what I'm trying to say, is processed a little bit differently, and there are more steps, more laws, more rules, because we are dealing with our own kind, right? Fossils are a different story in that they are processed more rapidly. There are not as many considerations. There's not as much red tape involved. So if you are at a construction site and you happen to find something that you think might be a fossil, bring it into the nearest museum. Doesn't even have to be ours here at Morrison. And we'll get out there after hours, so we're not in the way, take a look at it, and give you a recommendation as to what should be done.
That's very cool that you guys are willing to work with people, and it's it's kind of it's the only thing you can do, really, is to try to make it easy for people and to try to help and be a part of that story so that history isn't lost.
Right.
But it is, I mean, when I think about it, it's amazing how much can be discovered from what seem like tiny, insignificant factors when it comes to paleontology. Like it's,
Yeah.
I'm always amazed when I, go through a museum or something, and just like you explained to me, it's like when we find this, now we know this.
Right.
And I would never be able to do that jump in logic. It's so cool. But it just doesn't take much to get you more information that you needed to be able to put together a full story.
It does kind of depend, because ultimately there are parts of animal bodies that are more important than others. And it's not universal what those parts might be. For example, the tail of a stegosaurus is more valuable to me as a researcher than the animal's neck. But the neck of an apatosaur and its close cousins is more valuable to me than its tail would be. So it depends on the piece that we have, the part of the body that we have, how much of it we have, and most importantly, it's that contextual information. So where was that fossil found within the earth? And then we go back through the literature and really rely on previous generations' work and the data that they've collected to thread our recent discovery in with all of that previous work done. I mean, you really have this multi-generational, multi-brain, almost hive mind coming together to help you make an observation that might seem fantastic to the general public, but even that one person making that observation is not doing it alone. They're just a link in an intellectual chain going back into time.
Mm-hmm. That is so cool. How is technology sort of evolving to help you guys do this job better? I feel like we must have better ways to look into the ground without digging, right? We must have some way to know what's going on even before we put shovels in, yeah?
Oh boy, I wish. No, we really don't.
Wow.
It would be wonderful to set a scanner on the ground and be able to prospect for bones. And there is some technology that can look at the changes in density and rock below. We've played with it a little bit here in Morrison with some students from the Colorado School of Mines years back. We didn't really find anything of value because the cement in the rock and the structures within the rock, these things called concretions, which are soil formations that are natural, that are a result of changing chemistry in the rock, will give you false signals. And the resolution's pretty low. And gosh, we just, it'd be a wonderful thing to scan the rock. Even the fossils I have here in the lab from Quarry 5, we've put them through high-powered X-ray, but because there's no density difference between the rock and the bone, we don't see anything. It's just fog. So if I want to get a look at what's in this rock, and I want to look at, say, the other side of this maxilla, the upper jawbone of this Apatosaurus, I have to remove the rock from it. Now, the technology that we are using, I don't want to disparage. It's not computer-based, but not everything is in this world. These are precision-made aeroscribes, so tiny jackhammers with hard tips that run at low air pressure so they're not breaking apart the bone. And they help us to remove grains of sand from, like, literally one at a time.
Man.
From these fossils. And because the work is so fine, we use retired surgical microscopes, good optics, Leicas and Vilts and whatnot, to guide our progress. But it is tedious and time-consuming.
Do you have to have like real surgeon hands to be able to pull that off? I mean, I can't imagine I could do it. My hands shake like crazy no matter what I do.
Yeah.
You really must be deep in that work.
Well, I mean, my hand shake too, but I only prep with the other hand. So channeling Gene Wilder there.
Yes, a full Blazing Saddles reference. The first on the podcast.
You're welcome.
Congratulations.
You're welcome.
I'm so excited that you just did that. That's great.
No, I've always wanted to do that. It just made a dream of mine come true.
Perfect.
But I mean, in all seriousness, it takes time and training, and because our museum, even though we're a municipal museum, we run with a very lean budget, a skeleton budget, if you will.
Perfect. Yep.
That was good.
You're on top of it today.
Thank you. I'm on fire. And we rely on volunteers to help us to do this fossil preparation. It's not economically feasible for us to pay professional preparators to do this type of work. So we train folks, and there are some folks that, depending upon their own natural skill set and ability, can do this fine prep and work on delicate specimens and teeth, which are the most delicate of the delicate. And there are folks that find joy and value with larger air scribes chewing on rock where there's not a lot of fossil material. And that's very useful too, as you can imagine.
Well, I think about the number of people that watch these like unboxing videos on YouTube.
Yeah.
Whatever that is inside someone that could watch that for hours, because I certainly couldn't do it.
Yeah.
That's got to be the same thing, only let's apply it to something useful.
Yeah.
Right?
It's fun because, I've seen those unboxing videos. The kids have showed me those.
Yeah.
And, there's always a little card that tells you what's inside, right? It's labeled. It's brilliant.
Ah.
Okay. With fossil prep, it is like that unboxing idea where you are removing sand and mud from an object that hasn't seen the light of day since it was buried, in this case, the end of the Jurassic, some 146 million years ago. When I uncover a new section of bone, I am the first living thing to see that section of bone since that animal was buried. And I know that this is the first time it's seen sunshine since the Jurassic. Since
cool.
Before we had the Rocky Mountains here. So it is a humbling experience, but at the same time, I also, as I'm cleaning these fossils, I've seen them change shape. I will have an idea of what they might be, but sometimes as I'm cleaning the fossil, I realize that I was wrong. And as I see more and more of the fossil, oh no, it's not this type of bone. It's that type of bone. So fossil preparation is value in that just proper identification of specimens. Right. Nothing comes labeled. I wish it did. That would make my job easier sometimes. And sometimes we can recognize a bone from a specific region of the body, like an upper arm bone, the humerus. And there's anatomical rules that all humeri play by, and you can identify them with those.
What's the worst accident that you've witnessed with fossil preparation? Has anybody ever just broken a tooth clean in half? Is that a big problem when that happens? It's
something that is always avoidable. The accidents that I see most commonly are when folks lose a bit of focus and a bone gets nicked by the tip of an air scribe. And I try to encourage our preparators and all preparators to take breaks. But we have to understand that fossil preparation it's a destructive process. The fossils are data. It's a ton of information, really. But so is the rock. And we are choosing what needs to be destroyed and what needs to be kept. And I have the philosophy where we want to just minimally prepare a fossil. We're going to leave a bit of rock behind. The rock is data. It's useful. And we just want to be able to see the fossil, identify it. Too many preparators, in my opinion, see rock as a nuisance, as a barrier, as something that is so off-putting that it must be terminated. So you don't just remove all of the rock, but for good measure, the first layer of bone too, because it has to be shiny and pretty.
Interesting.
See that a lot, and it makes me throw up in a trash can every time I see it. It is awful because you've lost so much data. And this is all about the data. So leaving rock behind is important. When it comes to big accidents, I think over preparation, an accident that most people don't realize they've made, is the greatest accident anyone can make.
Which is getting someone pregnant, which is...
Well, it happens.
Mm-hmm.
You see, when a man loves a woman...
This is the
Different
Dinosaur
podcast.
Sex Hotline.
Yeah.
What is the worst mistake?
The worst mistake is over preparation.
So shaving off
too much rock
real
and bone along with it. Sometimes that is the mistake because you've removed crucial data.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it is very common.
Yeah, I feel that would be my problem because I'm like that. I'd be like, well, this isn't shiny yet.
Yeah.
You know, I see that.
And it's okay because, the folks that tend to be excellent preparators in my experience have an artistic sense and an artistic sensibility where they have an aesthetic that I think that sometimes they are trying to achieve. And whether that's for a museum or a commercial application, selling Wyoming fossil fish that are dated back to the Eocene, a time after the dinosaurs. Okay, I get it. But by removing too much rock, you are compromising the integrity of the fossil because usually you're removing bone along with it. And you're also removing crucial evidence about the burial of that specimen if all of the rock is gone.
Like what kind of evidence?
Well, for example, okay, let's say this block in front of me that has this dinosaur skull in it. Let's say that I didn't know where it was from, okay? And I wanted to figure out where it came from, generally speaking. Let's say I knew generally it was from this Morrison area.
Sure.
The bones themselves are not going to give me those direct clues. The chemistry might be somewhat helpful, but the most helpful set of data that's going to tell me where it came from is the rock itself. As it turns out, in that Morrison formation, each one of these sandstone beds is slightly different from one another. They're like fingerprints. And I can see this rock, this lithological, fancy word for rock, lithological fingerprint in this rock. And I can narrow down to the exact 2 sets of beds where this came from. And within those 2 sets of beds, there is variability as well. So I might even be able to find the exact bed from which this block came from because the rock is present. The rock is gone, right? It's all removed. The bone is shiny and polished, looks beautiful, looks brand new. Mm-hmm. I couldn't do it. I couldn't tell you where it's from. And here's why that's important. Context in paleontology is vital. If you want to understand, say, the burial of a dinosaur skeleton, to see if maybe similar remains of dinosaurs were from the same animal or not, or if an animal, if their remains are found within streams or lakes or swamps or deserts, that's all rock data, not fossil data, rock data. So being able to put these animals into the habitats that they probably knew and were buried in, if you want to understand dinosaurs like I do, it's just as important as the bone.
That is so cool. This process must take, I can swear it's after dark, absolutely fucking forever. Like, how long will this one has this one project taken you, and will it take you roughly?
Oh, geez. So with this particular skull, I prepped on it for a couple of years to get it to the point where it's at now, where it's about half done. I can see half of the specimen. I stopped because I felt that the tools that I had available at the time were inadequate for finishing the job. And that's not a budgetary issue. They just simply didn't exist.
It's a technological issue.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've acquired them over the past couple of years, but I've been distracted with other projects at the museum. I mean, as an administrator, which honestly does take priority over my hat as the curator as well. There were other problems I had to solve, money I had to raise to keep the museum open, adjustments that we had to make to our program because we had to manage the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Well, as we're in the latter days of the pandemic now, I'm able to return to projects like this one and finish it up. So, what was the question again?
How many? I'm just trying to think of the hours ultimately.
Yeah.
Like,
See, hours.
How long can you even? I mean, for me, so I'm interested in people. So I'm thinking about a person like you who is dealing with a fossil like this, and I don't have the patience to sit and do what you do. I would be able to do this for about 10 minutes, and I'd be like, man, I'm going to go find something else to do. But you must have something inbuilt where you can just sit and just work on this.
At times. I mean, when it comes to the amount of time invested, when it comes to preparation, my philosophy is it takes as long as it takes. No one can pressure me. I will not allow anyone to pressure me to prepare a fossil quickly. Because if you try to prepare something quickly, it will not turn out well. It's a bad idea. So in the best interest of the fossils, which I'm most concerned with, I will move with all diligent speed, but it's going to be slow, and people are going to have to wait. I will also say that someone's brain, like mine, I don't run on Gregorian calendar time. My brain is stuck on geologic time.
Yeah.
I try to think on bigger scales. So when you think of years, this is seconds in the geologic time scale.
I wondered how that would affect your perspective just as a person, how time moves when you're thinking in millions of years.
Geez. Well, when it comes to life and its fragility, but its diversity, its strengths, its weaknesses, death, extinction, the ultimate death, right? If you look at it through the lens of a paleontologist's glasses, I think that you would see the world very differently, because everything is on a different time scale. There are patterns that we can see, that, but they're sometimes irregular and often cryptic. So it's up to the interpreter, I suppose, to find that value, the philosophy derived from the science. And that can change from person to person. And some ideas are certainly not going to be relevant to others. But I have always found strength, personal strength, inner strength, connecting with these ancient life forms and understanding their role in the world, their strength in the world at the time, but realizing that their time passed. And not in a big sense, but I have a dinosaur here. The skull is about as big as a horse's head. This dinosaur is as long as 3 school buses. It weighs as much as 8 female Asian elephants duct taped together.
Jeez.
Which is really mean. You should never do that. And it's a just strong, beautiful animal, right? Gorgeous beast. But it passed. It's dead.
Right.
And this is a species that's the last of its line. And as we move forward into time, into the Cretaceous from the Jurassic, we see that these animals, this lineage, is gone. Okay. But I do know that I can trace the lineage of animals like this through a good almost 10 million years worth of rock. A beautiful period in which this amazing animal was able to survive and adapt, and through generations, their bodies changed to cope with competition from other herbivorous dinosaurs, predatory threats from dinosaurs like Allosaurus, and this incredibly harsh Jurassic savanna that they were living in and thriving in, thriving in pretty hostile conditions. They made it, and they passed. I mean, there's some obvious lessons that we can take from that in our own lives. The strength and resiliency of life, the ability to change and adapt, but the finality of death. And what did you do in the time that you had? I mean, we're all going to die. I found a wonderful fossil, something I've actually wanted to look. I've looked for it and wanted to find, but figured it was hopeless. It was just a long shot, and I actually found this fossil, and I can't tell you what it is yet. But I will. You circle back to me in about a year.
Okay.
All right. It is cool. But I found this bucket list fossil, something I never thought I'd find, right? And I thought, I might have 40 more years where I can spend with this thing that I've just wanted to find and understand. That's going to help me develop a greater understanding of an animal that I've always been curious about. And, it is humbling, and it makes me want to take every day that I do have and spend it doing something where I'm making a contribution to another person, family, friends, getting to know someone, and hopefully setting the groundwork for someone else to maybe look at these same dinosaur fossils in the future and develop a better understanding than I had, and maybe find more fossils. And whether my ideas turn out to be right or wrong, it doesn't matter. I had my shot. I've had that experience, and in science, it's not about being right. We get too hung up about right. What's the correct fact? How much did a T-Rex weigh? How fast could it run? What's the biggest dinosaur? Who fucking cares? It's not important. It's not important at all. There's no value to that. Try to understand these animals and the glory in which they came to be on this planet, how they moved, how they interacted with one another, how the ecosystem that they were a part of rose and how it fell. That extinction event, that turnover, and the next dinosaur ecosystem that would have come in. Those are important questions that need to be answered, and the answers that we currently have, they need to be refined. That constant search and questioning and holding these ideas that we have about these fossils tentatively in our brains is far more important than being right.
That is super cool. Man, this is some mind-blowing stuff. You're making me think of some really, really cool philosophy. I mean, I think the entire picture of the dinosaur sort of keeps you in this like classic Stoic philosophy of like, no matter what you do, you will be dead and non-existent at some point, and we will all be, and that's it. Right. So what do you have in front of you? I'm thinking of two really cool philosophers. The first one would be obviously Marcus Aurelius, who that's from. And the other one is a guy who said that man's greatest fear is that we'll die, and our only certainty in life is that we will, which I think is very cool. That's
right.
The great philosopher Steve-O from the Jackass series. I'm dead serious. That guy's really interesting. I think of both of those because you're right. It's strange to walk around a museum like this because you're right in that great realization of like just how tiny you are in how massive of a world you are. I think there's sort of two areas where we get that, and one is in paleontology and in deep, long ago history of the Earth. But then we also get it in the stars. We get it through the astronomy that we know and that we're trying to find out. That was actually one of the cool things talking with Alina, because she also is an astrophysicist, which I don't know how she functions. Like I don't know how you function living in that philosophy all the time. But I also don't know how she functions because she's got those dualities sort of both playing.
For sure.
But it does make me feel small. And some of the things that make me feel so small about the dinosaurs are how they seemed like they were, to me, you tell me if I'm all wrong here.
Sure.
To me, they seemed like a perfection of evolution in a way. It seemed like they were here to conquer the Earth, and they absolutely did it for a long, long time, longer than we have.
But everything is the perfection of evolution, right? At that time. But the Earth is always changing. The climate changes, landscapes change, the Earth is physically changing, and life is struggling to keep up and adapt and survive. And sometimes that's possible, and sometimes it's not.
Right. Because, well, the other thing is you can be perfect on Earth as it is until a cataclysm happens.
Right.
Which now we're not even talking about Earth anymore. We're talking about something that is affecting Earth from an outside force, which is just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, whether you're talking about a big space rock smacking into Earth, or volcanism event, or climate change, the Earth's rotation somewhat changing, wobbling, tilting in an unusual way, so that polar ice caps either develop or melt. There's so much that can happen that's natural, that's of this Earth or of this universe, kind of one and the same, really, that is going to force life to change and adapt. It's fragile on the individual level, right? But as a whole, the diversity of life and life itself as a group is incredibly resilient. Individually weak, as a unit strong.
Life finds a way, if you will.
Well,
life, yeah,
something like that. I think that's in that book.
It's in a book. I think it's in a book. I think that's where I read it. I get to be the liaison for the common man here, which is one of my favorite things about this podcast. I don't have to come and be an expert in anything I talk with anyone about. I just let them do their thing. But it is, I mean, all of this stuff is just so fantastic. It has always felt like this is made up to me, which is, I'm aware that it's not, but it's like, no way, because I only have, like you said, like a second of understanding of the entire time scale of this Earth's history. It's insane. I mean, I can get blown away by watching Planet Earth too.
Oh,
so
sure.
like even things that do exist now, I'm like, that's not real, you know?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things to do right now is listen to podcasts with people's opinions and perspectives on life that are unusual to me, in the sense that it's not the experience that I've known or lived. And one of my favorite things about this museum, something that I don't think that even the public recognizes, is that when you visit, you're actually part of the story, because you're connected to life. And when you finish our tour program with our docents and you're in the Ice Age room, all of it's connected to you, because humans were here at the end of the last Ice Age, hunting mammoths and camels and horses. But museums themselves are interesting institutions because they collect people, and people that have a passion and a curiosity that they want to explore. And since I've been the director of this fine little organization, that's 2006, I guess, is when I was thrown in that chair. We have had a very low bar for acceptance to our volunteer program. Do you want to know what that is?
What is that?
You have to show up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the people that show up, by and large, get woven into this fabric. And because curiosity is this beautiful, but I think it's not as well recognized as other human behaviors or emotions like love. But curiosity definitely binds us together, because when you look at my crew here, they're from all walks of life, all ages, political backgrounds, socioeconomic status. We have this cool group with various perspectives that help me to better understand my own species, which is useful for me because I think I'm more comfortable with the old dead things.
Fair enough.
So
yeah, you make me think of one of my favorite shows right now, which is Ted Lasso. Have you seen this?
Oh, it's brilliant.
It's amazing, right?
Come on, Bill Lawrence.
It's
I thought this
phenomenal.
was the Scrubs podcast today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to that, but I love Scrubs. I just haven't had a
It's
chance.
not as much about Scrubs as I would have thought.
Are they
but
doing it remotely, or are they doing it in person?
remotely?
See, I can't listen to podcasts that are remote. I'll just skip them. I feel bad about that. I've done remote podcasts with really cool guests, and I think they turned out really well. But as a listener, I'm just like, I can't, like, there's so much that's missing from humans talking in the same room together.
Yeah.
To like talk about Ted Lasso for a second, but in that show, you're right. He brings up the value of curiosity, which is one of my favorite moments when they're playing the darts game, and he's just like, be curious. And that is what can make a great man. I'm really trying to live that. I'm really feeling that.
Yeah.
And luckily I get to do so many things like this podcast that just allow me to be curious and walk in with the things I know about, and then just find a whole new set of things I have no idea about from my guests. It is my favorite thing.
Oh yeah. I can
Speaking
see
of
it.
which, let me see how much time. I don't want to make you late. Let me get I'm gonna get Andrea to come in here and take some pictures for us really quick.
No worries.
But we don't have to stop or anything,
Okay.
because I bet she's got questions after she's been exploring the museum.
I would hope so.
I don't take her to enough museums. It's my fault. I just, my attention span is so small. It's a problem. I'm working on it.
No, and don't apologize. I have for years evaluated how people use museums, looking at labels and reading said labels, looking at objects, trying to figure out what they are. And the conclusion that I've reached after a couple decades of this observation is that the only people that read the labels are museum people.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
It turns out the public doesn't read the label. They want to know what they're looking
Well,
at.
people don't read hardly at all.
They kind of look at museum exhibits like you would flip through a magazine.
Yeah.
You're going to get pulled into like anchor specimens.
Yeah.
You're going to want to look at something special. But in order for people to hear the story that we want to tell, what we do here is we show them the museum. We take them on a very informal tour, ask them questions to figure out what they know or what they might want to know, and introduce them to life history with that discussion. That is the most effective way to show people around. And I would like to see more museums adopt that. For a big box museum, I think that'd be fairly difficult because of the amount of people going through.
Right.
But man, I'm all about quality over quantity.
Well, I'm so silly too. This is all my fault. But I like going to museums. Every time I do, I have a really good time.
Mm-hmm.
And I do like reading. I'm one of those people that actually enjoys. Like I have the attention span for it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason it's so silly is because museums in general are just so cool now. Like they're integrating technology in amazing ways for the touch screens and the things you can do, and now I can read over here. And so like we're learning, I think, how to get to people's sense of wanting to learn better.
Yeah.
Like the new obsession in the Hickson household is the Duolingo app, which I tried years ago.
Oh, really?
And it was terrible years ago. It was just
sure.
like so boring. It was the same sentence over and over again. But now it's phenomenal. They've really gamified the whole thing.
Oh, nice.
And I can play it all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So as we're discovering these things more and more, we're also discovering how humans work, and we're becoming better at learning and teaching and figuring out how to teach. And I guess except for this year, there's been a lot of innovations in teaching this year. I'm not a big fan of how they've gone down.
Oh boy.
I don't know about all the remote learning
I
stuff.
think the whole remote learning thing, from my observation, is if we can learn from our failures in remote learning, I think that we will do much better this next go around. But
well, you have to start somewhere.
You do,
and you're gonna fail before you succeed. Ultimately,
that is the story of my life.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, that's gonna be my epitaph. But when it comes to museums, there is a place for technological innovation as a bridge when it comes to language, complex ideas, graphics, because people are so visual. But I have found that, and this might be just specific to paleontology, this may not apply universally to museums, so there's my disclaimer. People can do a Google image search and find a bajillion pictures of a T-Rex head, right? That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't do that when I was a kid,
mm-hmm.
right? But what is then the value to a museum display? It's the ability to be in the presence of that object,
right?
To make that connection. And if you can physically touch it, put your nose on the snout, feel the teeth, you're making that direct connection with natural history. Yeah. You are a part of that story. That is a understated power that I do not think that enough exhibitions or museums utilize.
Right.
Is trying to connect people with natural history through specimens and touch. I think too much emphasis sometimes is put on technology that can break, is gimmicky. I mean, I've watched a lot of museum displays that are interactive with complex ideas that are trying to portray concepts in physics or chemistry, things that are difficult to explain. But most often when I watch kids by themselves interact with those types of push button, pull lever displays,
mm-hmm.
well, that's what they're doing.
Right.
Smashing the buttons as hard as they can, seeing if things light up. Or if an adult's with them, an adult might start reading the label, but halfway through the first sentence, the kid is bam, gone.
Right.
And the point is not, they don't get the point.
Right. Well, it's like you're saying, like, as you're uncovering this, it's the first time it's seen the light of day in millions of years.
Right.
That's a crazy concept. And being in the, like you say, being in the presence, I think that we get back to that. I think that, I think everything's a big pendulum. And so we lean into the technology where you're not touching anything. You can just kind of see it all. And it's just giving you big dopamine spikes on your phone.
Right.
And eventually we pendulum swing back. We're going to find some middle ground where we reconnect with being, like you say, being in the presence of something, which is a totally different experience than just Google imaging something. Andrea, did you have fun in the museum You had a good time. Do you have any questions for our paleontologist? I brought you early so that you might ask a question or two, because I thought you've seen some amazing things today.
Well, I think that.
Come here.
Oh, I was talking to the mic. Wow, this is my first real appearance on this podcast.
Andrew Hickson, ladies and gentlemen.
Ooh. I thought one of the most interesting
Get closer.
things was that the like baby dinosaurs were so small, and
Oh,
then
yeah.
they grew to be massive. Like they were like 6 pounds as a baby, and they grew to be like 3 school buses long. But that's from like fossils that they found here, right?
Yeah. Well,
Tiny babies.
yeah, the sample that's down there. So you have those tiny little 6-pound babies, football-sized babies, right? Those are little stegosaurs. And as an adult, they're about elephant-sized, a little bit smaller, right? But then there's another baby track, an animal that's maybe 30, 40 pounds, but that's the critter that is giant as it grows up. I mean, it's mind-boggling. Dinosaurs had insane growth rates compared to modern vertebrates. One thing I like, you're familiar with Land Before Time, right?
Yeah.
Okay, there's,
The children's show?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
oh yeah. Oh no, it's there's a lot of veracity to Land Before Time, as it turns out, and it's at least as accurate as Jurassic Park, if not a little more. There's a famous scene that everybody loves, where the little dinosaur babies that are traveling in a mixed herd, which some dinosaurs did, like Stegosaurus and Camptosaurus, they gather in the footprint of a dinosaur and can sleep, right? They can fit inside the footprint of an adult. Well, guess what? Those little babies that were making the tracks that we have in our Jurassic Morrison display, they could do the same thing. They could curl up and sleep in Ma or Pa Stegosaur or Apatosaurus footprint. That's kind of cool.
How do they not step on their babies? I get nervous walking around toddlers that I might step on somebody.
I'm sure it
amazingly
happened.
dexterous.
Yeah, I think when it comes to like Apatosaurs, these animals that you have, there's 13 feet between the bottom of the foot and the top of the hips. So that's a big 2 stories high, right?
Jeez.
So the babies have to be nimble,
Uh-huh.
and they have to be able to be aware and avoid mom and dad's feet. Mom and dad are their legs are under a lot of muscular control, and they're aware of where their feet are. But accidents, I'm sure, did happen. We do have tracks in our display that have a little baby apatosaur speed walking, kind of at a low speed run. Would have been hilarious to watch, but the space in between these particular footfalls is double what you see with a normal walking pace. So, and it just so happens that those tracks are parallel to a partial adult footprint. So you can do the math there. And the little baby was either running to keep up with mom or dad, or in my case, it would be the baby running ahead, and I would be running after the little thing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I feel like what you're saying, Andrew, makes sense. Like with animals growing to be so big from so small, I feel like that happens more with non-mammals. Like that happens with animals that are born in eggs, right? Because we still see that. I mean, like fish could be like in tiny little eggs, but then they end up massive. Like you can have a massive barracuda from a tiny egg, right? That still happen.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's true to a point. But the diversity of animal life is so high that we look at things through the lens of our own species, like our big brains, what we think is normal for a baby. But when you look at life history in general, that doesn't apply. So it's a bit more complicated than that. Babies are all sorts of different shapes and sizes.
How do they gain so much mass how does an herbivore gain that much mass? Because even when I try to put on mass, I have to eat like crazy.
Right.
How are they doing it on ferns?
Well,
The mass has to come from somewhere.
Yeah, they're not eating ferns.
What
yeah.
are they eating?
That's a good question, because when we look at the fossil soils, the plants locally here we're growing in, there's not many plants. There's not a well-defined organic horizon. In fact, I don't see any organic horizon in our local fossil soils called paleosols, and no root networks called rhizomes within those fossil soils either. Many of these soils are somewhat bleached and oxidized, suggesting that the water table would rise and fall here seasonally. Okay, that suggests that if you have abundant water and the water goes away, seasonality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of plants. So my big question with the big long neck Apatosaurus is, what was it eating here? It could just be that the sample that's exposed here doesn't give us a full view. There could be a grove of trees not far from here. The trees in the Jurassic are interesting because if you've ever been to a hardware store around the December holidays, you will find funny little fern palm, weird looking trees, pine trees. They're real soft to the touch, and they're usually sprayed with glitter. It's real obnoxious, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Norfolk Island pines. Those are cousins of Jurassic trees, Araucarians. And a study done a few years back, and I can't remember the names of the authors off the top of my head, drawing a blank, sorry about that. They were able to show that if you were able to take the new growth, the bright green growth on those Araucarians and melt it in sheep rumen, let it ferment for 3 days, it yields more potential calories than what we're feeding cattle today. So they were eating Jurassic superfood, but it's not just the plants, right? It's what isn't preserved in the fossils. It's the magic in the rib cage. It is the digestive prowess that can eke every nutrient out of these plants possible, and the bacterial flora that would have populated those guts.
You have no idea how exciting this is for this podcast, because I'm a bit obsessed with bacteria and fermentation and those types of things. And the idea that fermentation played a role in how the dinosaurs just got so big is phenomenal to me.
I think it must have played a role to a point, especially when it comes to the biggest of the big dinosaurs, these long necks. As a group, we call them sauropods. We have a lot of ideas as to how those guts might have worked, but not a lot of data.
Right.
When we look at, say, the skull of this Apatosaurus, we can actually see little teeth, and their teeth are, they're usually described as peg-like, but they look like a sharpened pencil. They do have a sharp tip, and as they wear, that tip becomes beveled, and it still stays sharp, almost like a chisel. They have no grinding teeth, however. So these animals were using these teeth and the lips that we have evidence for with the plumbing on the other side of this bone, the maxillary, I cannot not say the word, there's a foramen, sound like Elmer Fudd now, and grooves that run on the outside of this bone that allow for lips to be nourished in conjunction with those teeth, plucking those Jurassic pines from their bases and then swallowing them whole. We have some evidence from cousins of Apatosaurus that these animals were swallowing stones, and for Morrison, sometimes hunks of bone as well. And they would use those objects as like a chicken gizzard. It's a gastric mill.
Sure.
It's pulverizing all of this material. I mean, you could take, and I've done this, it's actually kind of fun, just pine needles, and just the toughest vegetation I can find, the toughest leaves I can find, and in the museum's parking lot, and an old plastic butter dish and some angular gravel from the parking lot, put in a dash of water, you shake it up for a couple of minutes, and it's like, protein powder in a blender bottle. It just pulverizes that stuff, right? It's incredibly efficient.
That is crazy.
But and so there's a lot going on in the guts of these animals, and we know that the end result was maximum efficiency because we can see the end result of these animals and how large they got. From one of our Morrison dig sites, there's an Apatosaurus there. This is Quarry 10. It's actually within the town limits of the town here. And the thigh bone from that animal is 2,030 millimeters tall. So it's like 6 feet, 6 inches tall. So
I'm someone's thigh, just for the viewers.
You are someone's thigh. You are an Apatosaurus thigh.
That is crazy.
It's nuts, yeah. Huge dinosaur.
See, and so you missed this, Andrew, but we've been I was waxing poetic on how I felt like the dinosaurs were like perfect for Earth, and then because we're not that efficient as animals, but we're efficient at other things. I mean, because we learn to cook, we have better brain function, and we've built societies assuming that's a good thing to do as animals.
Well, animals like hanging out with other animals. That's not uncommon. So I think we have to cut ourselves some slack, and our desire to survive and procreate is absolutely natural. Even though we think of a lot of what we have done as a species as artificial. We think of some of the foods we're eating as artificial. We think about the roads that we're driving up artificial. We are part of life. We should not disconnect ourselves from the rest of that continuum. So how can what we have done be artificial?
Right.
And even when we think about, you mentioned food and fire a moment ago, right? Cooking things, making proteins more easily digestible.
Right.
We are the product of that food. We are the product of fire. We are the product of harnessing that technology. We did that to ourselves, not knowingly perhaps, but that's something that we've done to ourselves. When we extrapolate from that, we look at some of the things that our ancestors were eating. You look at wild forms of potatoes or grain or things like that, and they look nothing like we're used to today, right? Right. Civilization, the world that we know, that we can enjoy, with all of its strengths and virtues, of which there are many. Museums, I'd like to think, are one of those things,
Absolutely.
right? Art, creativity, conversation. These are beautiful things. This technology that we use to keep in touch with one another during a pandemic. These are great advances. These are wonderful things, and they should be celebrated. There's always a dark side. I think we focus too much on that, and I don't need to even mention what that is right now. We all know what we are capable of as a species, doing to one another and everything else that's alive on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
But harnessing various forms of life, creating genetically modified organisms. We don't like GMOs these days. We're told not to like GMOs. If it wasn't for agriculture and cultivating wheat and grain and livestock too, through selective breeding, we would have none of this.
Right.
We wouldn't.
Yeah, our greatest advancement and the greatest thing we did wrong was our self-awareness. All of us. I think I still feel like there is something that happens, but that line between natural and artificial, I hear what you're saying, but I still feel like it happens when you become aware of your own molecules. I feel like when we start playing on a molecular level, that is when artificial starts to take over. I mean, because everything else can be done. Like we can breed new. That's what we've done with GMOs. We've bred new species of different things. I worked at a farm, pollinating corn in the summer. That was my job, and we would cross pollinate certain crops. And this company was all about putting together the best, the highest yields of corn per
You've
year.
got
or
to
whatever.
maximize efficiency.
It gets so weird when we start becoming aware of the tiny things that make up life, though. I mean, so to me, it's weird when we start noticing the molecules, and it's about to get weirder when we start noticing the subatomic particles, and we go, the smaller we go, somehow the bigger our impact goes, and it's going to get strange.
Well, and I think that's true, but we've always done that as a species. I mean, from cooking things, we've altered chemistry, and everything is chemistry, and we are the only species that we know of so far. I'm sure there are others. We just haven't met them yet. That has done this, and we do need to think about the impact it's having on everyone in the world around us. I mean, we have the capability and the capacity to do great things for one another and the rest of this planet and for future generations. The question is do we have that political will and that individual will to make changes in our own lifestyles to make those things happen?
Yeah, hopefully we do. Volunteer at your local museum. Find out more.
There you go. Everybody plays a part.
I'm going to let you get back to it because I know you've got a meeting coming up, and I'm sure Andrea wants to go see more of the museum and show me her favorite finds. This is a first episode in many ways because we had our first Blazing Saddles reference, I believe, on the podcast, which is fantastic.
I really held back. I got to be honest with you.
Why?
I don't know. I get nervous.
Well,
It's
it was
like
your
I'm at
first time
work.
on the show. I love having repeat guests. Apparently, you've got a magical surprise fossil you're going to show me in about a year or so. Next
Yeah.
time we are in Denver, which is probably in about a year because I think it's kind of the pattern we're on, we'll come back and you can tell me all about that fossil.
All right, rock on.
I love that. Thank you to the listeners for listening. Thank you very much for Matthew for being on the podcast. And
You know, it was my
time
pleasure. If you've made it to this point in the podcast, I feel like I owe you something. So shoot me an email here at the museum. Send me a message through the Instagram page, and I'll show you around the museum. We'll just go ahead and we'll do that. I'll comp your ticket. It's cool. I just appreciate you and your time.
Nice. That is lovely. Take him up on that offer because it's a very cool place. The handle for the museum is, of course, it is
At Morrison Museum.
Morrison Museum. Your handle as well on Instagram?
Is it doesn't matter. I don't
Doesn't
remember.
matter. We'll just do the museum.
I just use it as an echo chamber for the museum anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Make sure to check out the video if you want to see the skull we've been talking about the whole time because it is quite cool. We'll have some pictures with the episode as always at T Hickson Life. Thank you to our sponsor Track Farms for the CBD that's keeping me going because as soon as we got to the mountains, my energy level went super low and my whole body was like, what are we doing at this altitude? So thanks Track Farms for that. Thank you very much again, Matthew. Thanks Andrea for being, this is your other first is that you were on an episode. So you haven't been on, you've laughed in the background I think of certain episodes, but you've done it now, my producer Andrea. And thanks for listening, everybody. As always, we will see you on the next episode.